So thank you, Kathy, for the introduction. I'm excited to see all of you here this morning. I know resiliency is this buzzword that's been going around, particularly as we've all moved to a remote or a hybrid working environment. And so it's important that today, we give ourselves the gift of presence and of talking about this topic so that we can figure out how to help ourselves. And if we have teams, our teams as well, as we continue to navigate all of this change. So as Kathy mentioned, we're going to go through these core things today. So defining resiliency, thinking about steps we can take towards developing more resiliency, thinking about productive ways and behavioral habits, taking some time for self-care, which is really interesting. I think an interesting topic because even a couple years ago, we weren't talking about self-care in the workplace. And then tapping into our teams and our colleagues' growth mindset, and then also making a commitment to ourselves to really practicing resiliency in the future. So let's just talk about the definition of resiliency. And I just want to make sure everybody can see the slides, the full slides, correct? Great. If at any point, I should have mentioned this, if at any point anybody has any questions, comments, please feel free to put them in the chat. I will be reading it. I'll be monitoring it. Or also, if you have anything you want to share, anything you're working through in the workplace with your team, we're here to help and support. So please feel free to share that as well. So the way psychologists define resiliency is looking at positive outcomes and competency in the face of stress, or also adapting to change or trauma, and then using our challenges we might face for growth in order to make future hardships or difficulties or challenges more manageable. Another way we can think about it is how we take what might be broken or not working and create change, and our ability to shift our mindset in a positive way. So, that is something truly unique to human beings, our ability to look differently and to think differently and to think positively. And when we talk about resiliency, it's not just, surviving through the challenges we might be facing right now in the current environment, or what we kind of call a VUCA world, like this ever-changing, volatile, world we're kind of living in, but really building better, more stronger, resilient muscles to be more creative and to have more positive outcomes. So we're going to go through these 5 steps today. So creating social connection, looking at our attitude, looking at values and meaning, how we become more proactive, and then leveraging humor in a way that makes sense for us in the workplace. So the first thing is around connection. So we know, and research shows us, that as human beings, when we have social connection, we are better mentally, we're better physically when we're faced with challenges. And so for those of you who were just on the last session, one of the things we touched upon was really empathetic or active listening. And so a way to build connection is through authenticity, vulnerability, and deep listening. So as authenticity is when we show up authentically in the workplace, it's showing the human side of who we are, not necessarily highlighting the negative things, but really showing the human side of who we are, and also practicing that vulnerability. Sometimes as leaders or as managers or even as individual contributors in the workplace, it's a little scary to say we don't know or we need help. However, in this environment, it's even more important now than ever to make sure that we're practicing those kinds of things in the workplace to be able to connect with one another. The final thing on this is really to surround ourselves with people who are, showcasing resiliency, or our role models who can help share their best practices as well in work and outside of work. The second piece of this is the second step is attitude and influence. So when we think about attitude, it's really looking at what are those things that I can control. So what are those things in my sphere of control, and how do I want to react to them? What emotions do I want to showcase? And what behavior do I want to show as a result of whatever it is that I'm facing? So when we think about this, if you look at those circles, when you go further out into the circle, the next thing we think about is influence. So for those things you cannot control, like influencing the ways that other people act or respond, and even how somebody perhaps maybe approaches their work. Just thinking about what is it you can have influence on as an individual contributor, as a contributor to the workplace, and or also potentially as a manager. And the last thing we think about when we're thinking about our attitude and influence is, how can you, if there are things that you can't control, how can you accept what is and then mitigate those things that you can't control and learn from those things that are coming your way, that are part of this change, or this ever-changing environment. So with your teams, one of the things, and with your colleagues, one of the things we suggest is thinking through situations that you may have been presented with and agree on how you might work towards influencing or controlling what you have control over and what actions you can take to learn and accept and move on. So this is something that we suggest if again, if there's something that has recently happened in your team and you recognize, maybe I didn't approach it in the best way, or maybe me as an individual contributor, I could change the way that I change my attitude and my behavior and my emotions around this. So this is a good discussion to have with your colleagues or your manager or your team members, and think about where you can have more influence in a positive way on projects, or where you could perhaps provide value or insights to outcomes that are happening within your team projects within the organization. So this is just a little bit of food for thought and something to jot down and think about in terms of your attitude, your influence, and your control. The third thing is values and meaning. So when we think about where we fit within the organization, so where you fit within Aura, and you tie it to the project you're working on and the organization's mission and their vision and values, what is it you've done that provides a sense of purpose? And that's what we think about when we think about our meaning, and creating achievable goals every single day that moves closer to giving us that meaning in the workplace. That's really important for navigating some of challenging and ever-changing times. So we also think about this when we think about the organization's values, or our values that we bring to work, and how we show up authentically as well, that provide that sense of purpose and accomplishment as well. Is there anything, and I'd love to know from all of you, what did each of you do over the past week or even the past couple of days that provided a sense of purpose and accomplishment for you, either at work or at home? So it could be, a small win. It could be something like, you really established a new connection with a team member that is in a different location from you. That's a great accomplishment and a great win. It could be that you had a new one-on-one conversation with your manager. It could be that you worked out a new working routine at home with your kids or your spouse. So would love to hear from you. Something that happened in the past week, you can go ahead and put it in the chat, that really provided for you a sense of purpose and accomplishment, which really means you're flexing those resiliency muscles. Give you a minute or so just to add something in there in the chat that you can share also with your colleagues that are on this call, that might also give them some insider perspective into something that they're doing, which really is showcasing their resiliency muscles. Kathy, anything you did over the past week?
Yeah, actually, I just welcomed, actually 2 weeks over the last, actually 3 weeks, just welcomed 4 new members to the people team. So really excited to build up, this team with, really talented and dedicated, individuals that will help us all, continue to be the best versions of ourselves, and, create an environment and a culture that's conducive to learning and growth, et cetera. So, big stuff, and really excited to build up the team to really help Aura and Pango continue to grow and succeed.
That is such a great, well, not only is that a great accomplishment, and that's a lot to onboard people in a hybrid working environment, but also a sense of purpose because you're really tying that to the mission and to the values of the organization. Anything else
Absolutely.
anybody wants to share? So the fourth step here is really to be proactive. So in thinking about when there's issues or challenges that might arise in this constantly changing environment, really thinking about what and approaching things in a way of saying, well, what do we really know, and not using emotion or letting emotion get in the way and or assuming things. And let's look at what needs to happen next. So this could be for you personally, if there's something, a challenge you're facing in the work environment that you need to address. And then who's going to do it and by when? And what does success look like? I think this question gets lost sometimes, particularly in the work environment. And it's a very important question to define for yourself, whether it be in the workplace, with the project you're on, or even at home. What does success look like? And then go ahead and take action. And so this is the fourth step in creating resiliency. And the fifth step, which I enjoy, is sometimes being able to take a look at a situation and saying, what is in this that I can actually kind of chuckle about? We know that using humor releases it reduces the level of stress hormones, so it reduces cortisol and epinephrine, and it really increases endorphins and the positive things that you need to navigate stress or navigate burnout. So I'd love to hear if there's anything you've done with your colleagues lately that has helped to create more of a fun and inclusive environment where you can actually, have fun in the workplace. So, the other thing is sometimes like just really looking at the positive pieces of the situation. So I'd love to hear from all of you as you've been flexing your resiliency muscles. What's one positive outcome of the pandemic for you or your colleagues or your team? I'll share for me, one of them is that I was on planes quite frequently prior to the pandemic. So I wasn't spending a ton of time at home, or I'd be gone for a couple of days every other week, which can be pretty disruptive. And so now that I'm pretty grounded, I've been able to spend a lot of time with my husband and my dog. And so that has provided me with a better work-life integration for sure. So anything, has anybody brought a pet into their home, or something positive with their family, or anything you've noticed with your team that's happened since the pandemic?
Actually, there was Leo in the last call, and he has continued using the Calm application. So 4 and 5 of us join every day if we can, just for 15 minutes. There is a 10-minute session every day, so for daily calm and meditation. So he's the one who suggested to do that walk. So he hosts that one every day for 15 minutes, and 4 5 of us join if we have time, and that helps a lot actually.
That's great. So for those of you who weren't on the last call, what Lopa just shared is that Leo does a kind of outdoor nature walk with his team, where everybody's walking outside and they have time to connect in that way, so that not only are they getting outside of nature, they're moving their bodies, but it also helps them to connect on a more human level. And so thank you for sharing that. So anything else, feel free to share in the chat. So the next thing we want to talk about is self-care. So as I mentioned, self-care wasn't something we necessarily talked about a few years ago in the workplace, but it's something that's increasingly important to really making sure that not only are we taking care of ourselves, but we're avoiding burnout, we're avoiding stress, and that we also create even more of a psychologically safe environment for ourselves and our team. So here's just 4 examples of self-care. The first is really understanding what self-care can look like. So allowing ourselves to have some knowledge around that. The second is thinking about our own mental health and well-being. So what is it that fuels us, that makes us get into a space where we feel calmer, where we feel less stressed? For some folks, that is taking a walk. For some folks, that might be exercise. For some folks, that might be meditation. Really understanding what it is that we can do for ourselves. Some folks, it might be getting a massage, whatever that looks like for you. The next thing that's really important is physical activity. So as we mentioned, as we were just talking about with Lopa and Leo's team, getting outside and taking those breaks throughout the day to be able to move our bodies is increasingly important. Even if it's 10 minutes every couple of hours where you can stand up, you can stretch, you can move. And the last thing is really around, healthy eating. I know, at least at the start of the pandemic for me, I was eating a lot of Ben and Jerry's, which is not the healthiest thing in the world. But, recognize is just we all kind of had our coping mechanisms, right? When this started and we realized we were going to be stuck inside our homes for quite some time. But really thinking about, changing and fueling our bodies in a way that helps us to show up as more productive, effective, and efficient. So if there's anything that any of you are doing, your best stress management techniques, whether it's deep breathing or yoga or meditation, anything you want to share from a self-care perspective that helps you to really flex those resiliency muscles and might help other people on this call, feel free to share those as well. The thing we also say about self-care is really, it's like that idea when you're on the plane and they say if the oxygen masks come down and you're traveling with somebody who needs your help, to put your oxygen mask on first. So it's okay to share with your colleagues and your team members what you're doing to rejuvenate yourself. Here are some examples of things. For some of us, the pandemic has been positive because we're not interacting with people all the time. For some of us, it feels like, oh, wow, we're pretty isolated. And now that we're moving to a hybrid workplace, I'm not going to be able to see my colleagues and have that social interaction all of the time. So really knowing what fuels you. So for some of us, it might be spending that time alone or blocking off some time on our calendars to rejuvenate and declutter our brains, to think more creatively, to approach problems differently. Part of this also could be learning some boundaries or, around space or time or expectations, or thinking about when you're at home, maybe taking a technology break, or not being on the phone all the time, finding ways to really help yourself in that self-care place, or even saying no to certain obligations that may be weighing you down that will help you both personally and professionally. So I'd like you to ask yourselves what you need right now from a self-care perspective. So just imagine it's 30 days from now. Imagine we're meeting again in 30 days. What would make a difference for you and how you're showing up in the workplace to be more productive and to be less stressed, perhaps, or to also flex those resiliency muscles? So what would help you in the next 30 days, or what do you need to implement in the next 30 days in order to be more resilient and to navigate the changes that are happening right now? Feel free to share if you want to share. The next thing we want to talk about over the next couple of minutes while we're together is really our mindsets. So some of you might be familiar with the work of Carol Dweck. She published her findings, which were really focused on the power of our beliefs and how even changing the simplest thing can have a profound impact on every aspect of our lives, not only the workplace, but everywhere else as well. So we're going to talk a little bit about growth and fixed mindset. So there's kind of 5 key ingredients here. So challenges, obstacles, effort, criticism, and success of others. And so, particularly when we're going through a lot of change, our brain can come up with a lot of different things or create a lot of noise. And so one of the things to think about is how you embrace challenges, or how you embrace maybe the fear of not looking good, or the fear of trying something new. And when we're faced with certain obstacles, Do we persist and practice resiliency, or do we give up easily? So I really want you to think through what it might look like with the fixed mindset. We're kind of avoiding things or looking towards the negative. And with the growth mindset, we're really thinking about how we can embrace challenges and really deliver results in a different way. So if we put it into action, people with a fixed mindset might believe that skills are born and you can't develop a new skill. People with a growth mindset might believe, okay, we can pick up a new skill. We can think about a problem differently. And a growth mindset, people really want to look at challenges as positive ways that they can thrive and take those lessons to really stretch their abilities and grow the skill set in the workplace and beyond. So, where could you or your colleagues or your team, what do you think, is there a challenge that you're facing right now where you feel that you might be approaching it with a fixed mindset rather than a growth mindset, or might be approaching it in a way that isn't flexing your resiliency muscles? Is there anything you could think of that you're working on right now with you or your team or your colleagues where a growth mindset could really be helpful right now? I'll use an example from the last session we just had, which is around, if you work on a team that's across different time zones, how do you communicate effectively? With a fixed mindset, you could say, well, there's no way we can all get together because we're across 3 time zones and we're across the world and we're different cultures and we might speak different languages. Or there's another way to approach it, which is, how can we find a way to communicate effectively so that everybody feels like they're involved regardless of the time zone? So that's a way to approach something with a more growth mindset rather than a fixed mindset. So a couple of more things here. One thing to think about is, we've talked a little bit about our resiliency muscles, creating that connection or the relationship, having that growth mindset, being adaptable to some changes, tapping into thinking about previous experiences and using them as a way to create lessons for positive growth, creating more happy moments or using humor when we come across challenges, and then also looking at our physical health. And then finally, when we're talking about resiliency in a lot of ways, we touched upon boundaries. And what does it look like when we have work-life integration in this constantly on 24/7 environment? And how can we have a greater sense of work-life balance, even though balance doesn't necessarily exist, but this work-life balance? I'm just going to open up a quick poll. And I would love to hear from you after talking about some of these resiliency muscles. What do you feel that you need to build that could help you over the next, week, month? Yeah. So you should see a poll in front of you. Feel free to go ahead and answer that question. I think the thing is too, is that we've all in our lives, even prior to the pandemic, faced different types of challenges or change, and we're all able to navigate through them. And so really helping ourselves to remind ourselves how resilient we actually are and continue to build those muscles. So I'll keep that open for another couple of seconds. Okay. Yeah, interesting. So we're kind of here. Oops, sorry. We've got a tie between happiness and joy and work-life integration. I think particularly when we talk about that work-life integration piece, I think what becomes increasingly important is really being able to develop boundaries and understand what's being expected of us, both at home and in the workplace. So we talked about, this was a broad brush overview in terms of resiliency, and some of the key takeaways were, how do you plug into those 5 steps of resiliency, and where can you leverage those with the challenges you might be facing with upcoming work changes, with now moving to a hybrid working model. Also, where can you think about self-care or create a self-care routine that helps you to be less stressed and more productive? And how can you look at things in a way that really shares a growth mindset? So I know we had a half an hour today. We have a few more minutes if there's any situations that you are experiencing right now where you want to know how to leverage resiliency or decrease stress or have a difficult conversation so that you can create boundaries, whatever it is that you are working through, or if you have any questions around any of some of the tips or steps or work that we shared today, happy to answer those right now. If you have anything that's on your mind, you feel free to unmute yourself or put a question in the chat. Or even a comment or a tip for your colleagues that are here. If there's anything you're doing that you're really flexing those resiliency muscles and showcasing resiliency through these changing times, if there's anything you could help your colleagues with today as well, that would be useful.
Sure. I'm happy to share something, and I speak with many people in the business, both managers and individual contributors throughout the organization. Self-regulation and a lot of resiliency regulation. Sometimes the beast will give as much as you feed it, and you really need to kind of protect your time to do a lot of the kind of uplifting of self-care for yourself. So don't be afraid to block off your calendar, reasonably to be able to do that. Amanda actually spoke at the last session about some people at the end of the day, because everybody's working from home, they get in their car, they drive around the block, they come back, and then they have like literally, kind of turned, off their mindset from work to like home now. Whatever, you can do to kind of help yourself, kind of self-regulate, to build up, more resiliency muscle, during the day, during the work, and really throughout your life, just, think about, what that looks like. And very often sometimes it is blocking off sometimes, and, incorporating different tips in terms of, boundaries from work to home life, because they get very, skewed, with the 100% remote environment that we now work in.
Yeah. And our brains, are dealing with a lot right now. There's a lot of uncertainty in the world. There's a lot of confusion. So our brain can get confused, and that can be exhausting for our system. And so it is really important that we allow ourselves that space and time. And we also have outlets of people we can connect with and communicate with about whatever it is we're feeling. And that doesn't necessarily have to be somebody in the workplace, but it's really important in this time where we create the space and we also create the human connection. So Patrick also shared in terms of, if you're dealing with a personal issue, it's better to let colleagues know without giving them details. I completely agree. So trying to work through it when you're not mentally well is counterproductive. Absolutely. So I think there's two sides of this. One is remembering to approach your colleagues with empathy and with understanding, because we don't know what people are working through in their personal lives. All of us have different situations. Some of us might be caring for children at home. Some of us might be caring with a sick family member. There could be a multitude of things people are dealing with. And so we are human beings. We're not doing beings, right? We're human beings. And so we sometimes have off days. And when you see that and recognize that in yourself, it's, I think it's better to know that, and to know that you're not going to be as productive and effective. And it's probably going to be to do a disservice to yourself, to your colleagues, and to your team members if you try to show up and push through it without sharing, hey, there's something going on for me personally. I just wanted to give you a heads up. I may not be as on today as I normally am. Anything else anybody wants to share? Any questions you want for us to answer for you, or anything you're navigating through that you're maybe not quite sure how to approach it? You are quiet on this second call.
Hey, Amanda.
Hi,
This is
Liz.
Liz. I'm happy to jump in and kind of throw a question out there for the group, I suppose. I like what Patrick said too. So it kind of builds off of that. Do you have tips for people when they're trying to maybe set a new boundary, right? We've all been in this space for a while, and some people might just be kind of figuring out, oh, I need to set a boundary around when I work or when I'm on video and when I'm not. Any tips on how to kind of like approach that conversation the first time, if that's helpful to the group?
Yeah, I mean, so I think it depends on what your role is, right? So if you're an individual contributor and need to have a conversation with your manager around that, I think part of this is, ensuring in on both sides, ensuring that you have a safe space to have that conversation, but also just saying this, I think in this environment, everybody understands that people are navigating different things. And so really saying and approaching it and saying, I'd like to have a conversation around, my working hours, around setting some boundaries and sharing what's most comfortable to me and what's most effective for me in terms of how I communicate with you. I think that goes both ways for an individual contributor and a manager. And it's just important to have an upfront conversation. And I would say earlier, the better. The sooner you have the conversation rather than getting, 2 or 3 months down the road. And if there's something that has shifted, I think in this environment, as soon as something shifts where you need to move the boundary slightly, then it's important to have that conversation sooner rather than later so that somebody isn't surprised. Kathy, do you have anything else you want to add to that?
No, I totally agree. Building trust within our teams, with our colleagues and peers. And peers is all, around communication and effective communication and feeling comfortable, sharing within those boundaries, and having those conversations in terms of some, boundary challenges you may be having with your manager. Will just kind of really level set the expectations to understand what your need is and what the need is of the business, and being able to kind of plan a way forward around that to make sure that both objectives are being met. So
yeah, Liz, and thank you for asking the question. I'm sure a lot of people are trying to navigate that exact thing right now. And anything else anybody wants to share or ask while we're here? Well, Kathy's going to be sending out some additional information. So some tips that you can all use as an aid memoir or reminder of how you can practice resiliency on a daily basis. You'll also get these slides if that's helpful for you as well. And then there's also some LinkedIn learning that will be sent out. So if you want to dive deeper into some of these topics or develop a new skill set around this, there'll be some more information that comes your way to help support you. Also, just so all of you know who are here, our next session will be the end of September. And it'll be, understanding and leveraging EQ or emotional intelligence in stressful times. So a kind of carry on from this topic in terms of building on what we've just talked about today, but really understanding emotional intelligence and what those pieces are of emotional intelligence and how you leverage them during stressful times. So hope to see some of you there at the next session. And I know Kathy's going to send something out if you're to give feedback, or if there's other things we want to dig into in the topics, we can as well.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Amanda. Thank you everybody for attending. Look forward to the next session. And as Amanda said, we will be gathering feedback and would love to hear your thoughts on the content, the sessions, and future subjects and topics you want to make sure that we address. So thanks again.
Thank you, everyone.
Awesome. Bye.
Bye.